Welcome to Just the Worst Podcast, episode number 24, to be perfectly precise. I'm your host, as usual, Billy Donnelly, whose work you can find over at joeblow.com. This is Infamous, and right here at Just the Worst Podcast. Interesting week of movies to talk about here on the show, and I'm not going to waste any time because there's a number of things I want to sort of dive into that I got an opinion on, and I want to put into some perspective for you as we discuss them at length. Number one, I want to start off over at Warner Brothers with the DC Cinematic Universe, as this week we got some news concerning Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Now, I know there's been a lot of concern, a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of anxiety amongst fanboys about the latest big enterprise that's supposed to move the DC Cinematic Universe forward in a way that Man of Steel never really quite set out to do. With Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, obviously they're starting to set the tone for characters like The Flash and Aquaman and Wonder Woman, and ultimately the formation of the Justice League. But in doing so, they're doing it in a way that I think is consistent with Man of Steel, but also B, at that point in time, not really setting themselves up to be sort of a rousing crowd pleaser that's going to justify the bloated budget that Warner Brothers has poured into this thing. I understand they see this as a major investment towards getting a shared universe off the ground, but when you factor in marketing costs, I believe $400 million or so to get the DC Cinematic Universe off the ground, it may be a little bit of wasteful spending, if you ask me, considering that there have been films made on fractions of that budget that have gone far, far more into the fan base and into the source material in order to really sort of crack the code and get things on the up and up for fans and mainstream audiences to sort of embrace these shared connected universes. Now, there's been obviously a lot of anxiety, I believe, over at Warner Brothers concerning the fact that this movie needs to do well over $1 billion in global box office to justify the cost that they have put into this film. But there's also some sort of anxiety amongst fans as far as what this movie is going to be. As I mentioned, Man of Steel didn't really set the world on fire. Really divisive film in a number of ways, with many people really liking it, a lot of people really disliking it, many people as well hating it, but not a lot of people who look at Man of Steel and say, "Oh God, I love this movie." So, sort of moving forward consistently with that film and doing a sequel or a follow-up that doesn't really change all that much. I think there's some anxiety as far as Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice is concerned, that it's going to be more of the same. And for a lot of people who really dislike Man of Steel, that's not really the answer that they were looking for moving forward with a second film. They wanted perhaps a change of direction, a change in tone, a different feel to the characters, something that was a little bit more entertaining and fun as opposed to something that's so grounded and serious. And when you've seen the marketing for Batman v Superman, it seems to be a little bit all over the place. There's been times where it seemed too comic booky, almost too light and jokey, not in a way that seems to be consistent with comic book tones, but in a way that seems like someone's really poor attempt at making what they feel is more comic booky. And as a result, tonally, it feels a little bit all over the place. Then there's the aspects of it that once again are a little too serious, which are where sort of my ideas come in. Maybe they didn't learn from the mistakes of the past and they just doubled down on the seriousness. And as a result, you're going to get a film that at a running time of what we hear is about 2.5 hours is going to feel kind of like a slog. It's not going to feel sort of breezy. It's not going to be fun and entertaining. You're not going to sort of lose yourself in it. You may just get bogged down with how serious it wants you to take it. And now, in addition to that, there's also the idea that maybe there's just too much going on in this movie. That this movie is being set up to be sort of the be-all and end-all of kicking off the DC cinematic universe. And as a result, there's just way too many pieces in place, way too many pieces in motion, to sort of have a cohesive movie that also makes sense on a number of levels. So you have obviously Batman, and you have Superman, and you have Lex Luthor, and we've seen the introduction of Wonder Woman here, and Doomsday is going to be a part of it. There are just a number of different characters being added into the mix that you wonder that even at 2.5 hours, if it's just too much being jammed into one movie. So you look at Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, and there are a number of things that people are taking up concern with as they hope to get a good DC Cinematic Universe movie sort of setting the tone. Now, we got some news this week that I found to be a little bit more concerning moving forward, which is that the home media release of Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, which will be down the line, which of course covers Blu-ray, DVD, and digital on demand. So your Amazon or your iTunes purchases. Excuse me. That home media release has now received an R rating from the Motion Picture Association of America, the MPAA, for quote-unquote sequences of violence. Now, when you look at that, once again, it sort of lends itself to what exactly does the PG-13 mainstream release cut look like, and how much needed to be shaved off of that for the MPAA to give that PG-13 rating, now that there's a director's cut that's going to be R-rated. Now, when I look at Batman v Superman, and there are a lot of people who have been really sort of jazzed about this idea of, oh my God, this is amazing. We're going to get an R-rated Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice movie. Oh man, it's so awesome. And I look at the R rating, and I sort of scratch my head. And I say to myself, why in the hell do we really need a Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice R-rated film? Why do we need an R-rated Batman film anyway? Why do we need an R-rated Superman movie anyway? Why do we need a movie R-rated concerning both of those characters for any audience? And here's where sort of we get into some real interesting area concerning superhero movies and comic book movies regarding who exactly it is that they're made for. Now, the people I find to be the most excited about an R-rated version of this film are your fanboys. They're older fans, my age and beyond. I'm 36, so in the 30s up through their 40s and 50s, older fans who have been involved in comics for a really long time in their lives. Comic fans who have grown up with Batman and Superman as they've sort of morphed and changed with the times a little bit, who have seen both the best and the worst of those characters, and who have really followed the transformation of those characters from sort of kitschy, over-the-top characters, most notably from their earlier TV series with Batman, of course, the Adam West television series that was just very campy, very over-the-top, as well as the Superman going back to George Reeves on TV, and Christopher Reeve on in the films, which was sort of a lighter tone Superman before things at times were able to get a little bit dark here and there within the pages of the DC Comics books. And as a result, sort of that crowd, that segment of the fan base has seen these characters change over the years, and it feels a certain ownership of these characters because of how much time it is that they've spent with them. They feel like these characters belong to them. They feel like these characters are theirs. They feel like their say in these characters is the only thing that matters. Why? Because once again, they have spent a great deal of time with them over the course of their lives that they almost feel like a part of the family. Now, the problem with that sort of exclusive mentality that fanboys seem to take over everything, whether it's Marvel or DC or Star Wars or a particular TV show property, wrestling, anything like that, that they've been following for a long time, they have a very hard time sharing with others. They criticize when things are almost too kiddie, not necessarily juvenile, but playing towards a younger demographic, a younger audience, which may be trying to attract either a new generation of fans or to speak to and connect with a younger generation of fans that already exists. Comic readers who are adolescents, comic readers who are young teens, comic readers who are still on their way up. They have a hard time sharing with that particular audience because they want things to be more mature. They want things to speak more to their sensibilities. And that's why there is sort of this celebration amongst the fan base, some corners of the fan base, about the idea of an R-rated Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. And I look at that film and whether or not it's going to receive an R rating. Well, it's not going to receive for the mainstream wide release. It's going to be PG-13 there. But I look at that film and I say to myself, I understand why that's PG-13. I understand why they're doing their best to sort of open it up to as many audiences as possible. Once again, with a $400 million budget, including marketing, they need to get as many asses in seats as they possibly can to drive up those box office numbers. But in addition, they want to increase their fan base. They want more than these hardcore, longtime fans who they believe they're always going to get and who are incredibly vocal in a number of ways that could detract from the project that they're trying to get made. They want a new generation of fans. They want a new crop to support these properties that will keep them going forward and forward and forward. You look at Disney, for example. Not that they have necessarily anything to do with the DC Cinematic Universe, but I just want to use sort of Disney's model as an example for how this is done, because I think they do it so brilliantly and have done it so flawlessly for so many years, which is that Disney has a number of classic films that have been around for seemingly forever. You go back to the Disney classics, the original Disney classics, films like Cinderella and Snow White and Bambi, and Sleeping Beauty, Dumbo. All those early films did a real tremendous good for Disney long-term in building an audience that was devoted to the characters, devoted to the brands, that love those particular characters. And as a result, they're Disney fans. They love Disney. They like everything that Disney brings forth. They like going to Disney World. They think about going to Disneyland. They would go to California Adventure, Shanghai Disneyland, which is going to open, I believe, later this year. They thought, maybe I can go there. They'd take a Disney cruise. They're devoted to the Disney brand. They like how it makes them feel. And as a result, they support everything Disney. Now, what Disney managed to do a lot of times over the years is that Disney would re-release films every once in a while, particularly in theaters, so that those audiences that have been with Disney for a long time would have the opportunity later in life to be able to share in those experiences with their kids, with godchildren, with nephews, with nieces, in order to sort of create the next generation of Disney fan. Younger audiences that now would also love Dumbo and Sleeping Beauty and Snow White and Cinderella and so on and so forth. And as a result, once again, now you just continue to expand and extend the life of your audience. You don't have an aging audience that once they get too old just sort of checks out of your product. No, when those people sort of age out a little bit, now you have the next generation that's been brought up to once again support your brand. And you hope that they once again will do the exact same thing for their kids and nephews and nieces and godchildren and so on and so forth. And as a result, you continue to have support for what Disney does year in and year out, whether it's the theme parks, whether it's the TV channels, whether it's the movies, because people look at Disney in a certain way, they expect quality, and they like the way it makes them feel, and they like to share in that with their family, with their friends. They like the community aspect of what Disney manages to provide. Now, films and properties like this, like Batman, like Superman, the parent companies who own these, DC Comics, Warner Brothers Entertainment, they look at these properties and they see the exact same model. They see something that older fans who have been with them for a really long time will come out and support, but they also see an opportunity to reach out and branch out to younger audiences who will also now become Batman fans or Superman fans or Aquaman fans, and as a result maybe they'll start reading the comics or buying the t-shirts or owning the toys or playing the video games. They want those people in the fold as well, because not only does it mean survival of the brand, relevancy of the brand long term, it also means revenue for the parent company who owns the property. It's a win-win sort of for everyone in that they continue to get money coming in from the thing that they deem as worthy of your time and dollars. And you continue to get survival of the product. And for younger audiences, they get something new that they could grab hold of and see how fantastic it is and why it's been such an everlasting thing. The problem with certain aspects of these fan bases are they don't want to share. They don't want new audiences coming in. They don't want somebody else's tastes and feelings and emotions factored into how these properties are explored in a TV show or a comic book or a feature film. They want something that is just for them. They want something that is for no one else. And as a result, they have a real tough time understanding why that can't be the only means for making these properties come to life. They don't understand that a $400 million Batman versus Superman movie cannot be sustained by simply making something that is for a very small yet hardcore portion of a prospective audience. They want movies that are made just for them. Movies that can be violent, that can have choice language throughout. Perhaps sexual situations and maybe some nudity. They want something that for them. And the violence. They want violent violence so that it caters to their sensibilities. No kids allowed. Now, do I believe that there are certain properties that feed right into those sensibilities? Absolutely. You look at a film like Deadpool, most recently, which was R-rated, had a number of those elements that this particular segment of the audience would embrace. And it works. Now, it doesn't work because of the freedom the R rating gave the filmmakers and the writers to be able to incorporate that into Deadpool. It works because that was already inherent in the Deadpool character. That it didn't soften the vision for Deadpool in any way. The R rating allowed them to sort of be true to the character and deliver a film that felt consistent with Deadpool. Look at Zack Snyder's Watchmen film, for example, which was an R-rated comic book / superhero film. And the reason those elements work within that film is because, once again, it's consistent going back to the graphic novel. It wasn't that they went out of their way to add these things to the film. It was that the film was consistent in using these elements much as the graphic novel did. But to just sort of want to take these R-rated elements and incorporate them into a film because why not, doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. A, it cuts off a huge portion of the audience. But B, who really needs an R-rated Superman film other than to be able to sort of rope it off and say, this is ours and no one else is allowed into seeing it? Same for an R-rated Batman. Or an R-rated Spider-Man, for that matter. It just doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense. Other than people believe that by having these aspects, they think for some reason now the films will be able to go into these territories that they weren't able to go into before. And you know what? That would be true. Except the reason they never went into those territories before was because it was not necessary. It was completely unnecessary to have an R-rated Batman or an R-rated Superman film. Who needs to see a Superman film that's that violent? Or that have tits and ass in it? Who needs Superman dropping fucks all over the place? No one, other than the people that want it simply for the novelty of having an R-rated Superman. Because it doesn't really speak to the character. I find it interesting that the people who are so excited about the idea of an R-rated Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice are the same people that once upon a time were kids themselves getting into Batman and Superman. And who have forgotten what it was like as an 8-year-old, as a 9-year-old, as a 10-year-old, to pick up those books or turn on the TV and be transported into Gotham City, into Metropolis, and watch these characters at work. They've forgotten the excitement of that. Of having action figures of these beloved characters and crafting your own adventures in the backyard, on the couch, on the floor of the living room. They've forgotten because now they've taken ownership of it and they do not want to share it with anyone else. And that's a mistake. It's a mistake to forget where you came from. It's a mistake to forget that somewhere out there is a young kid who is trying his hardest to get into Batman and Superman and other comic book heroes. He's picking up comics and he's excited about it. Excited about what's contained within. And this idea of being exclusive rather than inclusive, rather than sort of championing something that also speaks to and caters to and allows those younger generations to embrace and love and grow with those characters the same way these fanboys did when they were kids, is a mistake. Don't forget your roots. Don't forget where you came from, because you were that kid once too. And you have to remember that these things were meant for all of you. That you, as a kid, as an adult, there's something there that should speak to all of you. Some elements of the characters that you're able to say, yeah, I get that. That's what I love about them. And not trying to skew the characters in a way that is only for certain people. I'm not in favor of an R-rated Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. I don't know that I need additional sequences of violence in my Batman or Superman film. I'd like to see a film that sort of everybody can get behind. And not just certain people who believe that these characters belong to them. So those are my thoughts on Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice this week. I want to talk a little bit about The Witch now on this particular show. Now, The Witch, a very small horror film, came into Sundance last year, back in 2015. Filmed by Robert Eggers. A period horror film in a number of ways, taking place in sort of 19th century puritanical New England. And the film coming out of Sundance was getting a lot of buzz. Those who had saw it at the film festival could not talk enough about it, sort of could not explain how much they loved it. And it wasn't until A24 picked it up and held it until sort of now in February of this year that a lot of audiences were able to lay eyes on this. Now, there's a number, as a result, there's a long period of sort of hyping the film and its greatness by those who saw and love it, and sort of the disconnect between those people and those who haven't had a chance to see it yet. Who have been anticipating the film based off of the advanced word of those who did have a chance to see it at Sundance, where the film sort of came out of nowhere. And I saw The Witch. I really liked The Witch. If you listen to Just the Worst Movie Review Podcast, episode number 21, you can hear my talk with Angie Hahn of Slash Film about The Witch. And while when we first sat and saw it, we were not underwhelmed, but I think not hit with a film that met the crazy amount of hype that it had received coming out of Sundance, we found that the more we talked through it and examined and realized the things that we really liked about the film, the more that we ultimately really enjoyed The Witch. Now, the marketing from A24, of course, is going to go out there and promote the fact that other people truly enjoyed it. They're going to talk about the fact that some people found it to be one of the scariest films they've seen, to talk about the horror and the fright that some people have conveyed from their viewing experience with The Witch. None of that is dishonest. That is the opinion of people who have seen the film, that they are simply relaying to the general public. Now, you may agree with it, and you may not, but you're not going to know until you actually go and see the film. And some people came out of The Witch feeling betrayed that they did not get that film. Now, I can understand on a certain number of levels, because for me, I didn't find the film to be one of those motion pictures that you would come at like just pissing your pants in terror from. It's a very subtle film. It's a slow burn. It is a horror film in a number of ways, but for some, it's not what they would necessarily consider a horror film. Look, we have to remember that horror is a pretty wide-spanning genre. There's psychological horror, there's supernatural horror, there's slasher horror. There's lots of different horror out there. And lots of people see horror only in their definition of what horror is. They don't necessarily consider that horror is all of those things. They view horror through one particular prism because that's how it is. They define horror. And so they went and they saw The Witch and they did not like it. Which, you know what? Perfectly fine by me. If you went out and saw The Witch and The Witch didn't do it for you, all right. I'm sorry to hear that. It happens. It happens all the time when people get to see movies that other people like that just didn't do it for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. There is nothing problematic or incorrect about someone going out and seeing The Witch and saying, you know what? Just didn't do it for me. Because horror is completely subjective. Much like comedy. What you find to be scary or terrifying or frightening may be completely different from somebody else. Much in the same way that when you go watch a comedy, what your sensibilities find to be funny, what your sense of humor finds to be humorous, may be completely different from somebody else who doesn't find the same things funny. Who they don't laugh at the same things as you. So when you have that sort of response to The Witch, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But where I take issue here with sort of the response to The Witch is people who did not like it then going out of their way to sort of criticize those who did. Criticizing the film for not being horror because it didn't fit their particular mindset of what horror is. Criticizing those who found The Witch scary because they themselves didn't find it scary. And sort of going out of their way to ruin the experience for people who either did like it or may like it. To the point that they cannot let it go. There are times when people find movies and they watch them. These are films that other people like. And they watch these films and they don't like them. And they can't let it go. They beat a dead horse and they can't let it go that other people enjoy this film that they themselves do not. And to me, it's just such a ludicrous situation that people feel the need to go out of their way to sort of hammer something that they don't like simply because there are other people that do. It's bizarre to me that you would take so much time and effort and energy out of your day to sort of go at or criticize people who did manage to like a film because it doesn't necessarily fit into your tastes. Well, I hate to break it to you, but your tastes aren't the only tastes out there. Your opinion isn't the only one that's correct. And the quicker you acknowledge that, accept it, and move on, the better off we'll all be. Look, I understand that I speak a ton of stuff on these particular podcasts, on every particular episode. And you know what? It doesn't necessarily mean that my opinion is right. It just means my opinion is my opinion. And if you listen to the show and you say, Billy, you're full of shit. Billy, you don't know what you're talking about. Billy, I disagree. That's okay. I don't have a problem with that. Because you're entitled to have your own opinion as well. And I hope that it's a well-formed, educated opinion that you can back up and say, but this is why I think that way. And I'll say, that makes sense. I may not agree with it, but I can at least see where you're coming from. We can agree to disagree. But there are people who cannot do that. They see this as, well, this is my opinion, and that's the way it is. And how dare anyone disagree with it? Because if they do, then they're clearly just a fucking idiot who's wrong. And I don't understand why those people continue to operate on that level, because I see it all the time. I see it happen all the time. They just cannot handle that other people like something that they do not. Now, I've seen people who like something who can't handle people not liking their thing. They feel for some reason it invalidates their opinion. But now, by the same token, I've seen the flip side of it. I have seen people who don't like something feel almost invalidated by those who do. I'll give you an example. And I use it all the time. You look at something like the Transformers films. There are people who really like those films. They keep going to see them. They enjoy them. They get something out of it. I don't know what it is, but it's something. And as a result, when a new Transformers film comes out, they're excited about it. They go and support it, and the film makes a lot of money, and we get another Transformers movie. And by the same token, there are people who absolutely hate and loathe the Transformers films. Hate and loathe. They cannot believe that any sane, rational, sensible person of sound mind and body could find it within themselves to take the time out of their day to go to a movie theater and plunk down their hard-earned money to watch that travesty on the big screen. And to that I say, who cares? Who cares that they have managed to find enjoyment in something that you could not find enjoyment in? Who cares? Who cares that they find a different food dish more delicious than you? Who cares that they find that particular painting appealing to the eye while you do not? Who cares that they want to drive a different car that you find to be sort of appalling? Who cares? They're entitled to their own happiness and entertainment and enjoyment too. And if they're out there doing something that puts a smile on their face, that makes them feel good, that they enjoy, what's it to you to shit all over it? Why do you need to share your misery and unhappiness with other people to the point that you want to make them feel as awful as you do inside? You don't like The Witch? All right. Good for you. So be it. I hope the next horror film does it for you. But to sort of go out of your way to shit on anybody who did like the film, or who did find it scary, or frightening, or who did get something out of it, to me that's just unacceptable. Grow up. Learn to be an adult. And understand that it's not all about you. Everybody's got a right to find their own joy somewhere. All right, let's talk about Pacific Rim 2 really quickly before close out the show with some Oscar predictions. Considering the 88th annual Oscars, the Academy Awards, are coming this weekend, so I'll get into some predictions to close out the show. Let me talk about Pacific Rim 2, though, really quickly. So, Pacific Rim 2 has sort of faced a rocky road along the way. There's been talk about whether or not this film was actually going to happen. Guillermo Del Toro has been sort of pushing that it's going to happen. Legendary has been sort of pushing back against it, saying, well, we're going to look at the script and we're going to look at the budget and we're going to see if it works, primarily because the first Pacific Rim didn't exactly blow the doors off what everyone thought was going to be sort of this larger perspective franchise that would have kaijus and Jaegers battling it out in a way that typically blockbuster type audiences would just love. They would just love the shit out of that movie because it's giant robots fighting giant monsters, and who the hell doesn't want to see that? So, Pacific Rim 2 has been on sort of rocky ground, and for quite some time, even after there was an announcement made that they were going to be moving forward with sort of a sequel and maybe a TV show and sort of expand the universe out, it then seemed to be quite tentative with the film sequel really not getting the green light and the go-ahead that I think Guillermo Del Toro and everybody involved thought it was going to get at that point in time. So Pacific Rim 2 has really sort of been on the shelf. It's been one of those iffy propositions. Del Toro keeps saying it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But everybody else seems to be saying, yeah, maybe, without truly saying no. So Del Toro has sort of said, "Oh, I'm going to work on something else, maybe something smaller. I'm going to handle. I'm going to look into one of the other 500 projects that are in my docket and see if maybe I could do something with those." Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is one of the films that are up there that I think he might be looking to do next. But it wasn't Pacific Rim 2. That wasn't any longer going to be the top priority as far as Guillermo Del Toro's projects were concerned. However, what we have now learned is that Pacific Rim 2 does look to be moving forward. It will not be with Guillermo Del Toro at the helm. He will be involved in some respect, but Steven DeKnight, who is the showrunner on the first season of Marvel and Netflix's Daredevil series, as well as having experience being involved with Smallville and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel and Dollhouse, he will now be sitting in the director's chair for Pacific Rim 2. Now, what does that mean for Pacific Rim 2? I don't really know. I wasn't a fan of Pacific Rim 1. I thought the film was kind of dumb, to be perfectly honest with you. I didn't think it looked very good, especially in the projection that I managed to see on the big screen. It was kind of dark. Didn't really get the true understanding of the Jaegers and the kaiju as far as their look. I wasn't really fully impressed with that, and to have a film that visually doesn't do it for me and is sort of also being devoid of any sort of intellectualism, Pacific Rim just sort of fell flat for me. Look, I understand why there are people who really dig it. Did not do the same thing for me though. So moving forward with Pacific Rim 2, I look at that and I say, well, that film had so many fingerprints from Del Toro all over it, how do you really go forward with his baby in the arms of another man? So, look, Steven DeKnight, I think, is a very capable storyteller. Okay, I was really a big fan of the first season of Daredevil, which is his most recent work that he was involved in. I thought that the first season of Daredevil was tremendous. Along with Jessica Jones on the other end of the sort of Marvel's Netflix universe. But at the same time, I also thought that those shows would have benefited from maybe slashing a few episodes off of the series order. 13, 14 episodes, I think, sort of started to stretch things a little bit. I think maybe if they would have had a nice tight 10, it would have moved along at a much better pace. Now, as a visual storyteller, as a visual filmmaker, can Steven DeKnight handle Pacific Rim 2? I guess we're going to find out. Look, I still believe Del Toro's fingerprints are going to be all over this as far as creature and character design are concerned. As far as what some of those visuals will look like on the big screen. I find that Del Toro, in many ways, is a tremendous visual filmmaker, but is often lacking in character, in story. And I am hoping that Steven DeKnight is able to sort of fill those vacancies that a Del Toro film typically has, given his sort of pedigree with Daredevil and Smallville and Buffy and Angel and Dollhouse, which were all films that were genre, or all TV series rather, that were genre in nature, but had strong character development, creating characters that you did really care about, sort of really diving into those particular worlds, and giving you something to sort of latch onto. Now, granted, those are series which have a lot more time to be able to do those things, but I am hopeful that with Steven DeKnight coming on board for Pacific Rim 2, he'll be at least be able to take that knowledge, apply it to a feature film in order to give me a film that visually may be a little bit more than the first Pacific Rim as far as the monsters are concerned, but also be able to make me give a shit about the characters that are involved in that world to make for a much more enjoyable experience. So, Guillermo Del Toro not helming Pacific Rim 2 and Steven DeKnight doing it, I'm actually in favor of this change. I think it may benefit Pacific Rim 2 moving forward and the larger franchise that they're hoping to build. And for that, even though I'm not a fan of the first film, I wish Steven DeKnight luck, and I hope that Pacific Rim 2 may be able to turn around the mistakes that I thought Pacific Rim 1 made in really, really major ways. All right, let's get into some major Oscar predictions, since we're talking about major. Anyway, I'm going to just predict the major categories of the Oscars for this particular year, and we'll see how it is that I turn out when Sunday night comes and my predictions are put to the test. So let's start with the supporting categories first, and we'll make our way up. I'm going to fly through these a little bit in order to see how we make it happen for me. Let's start with the Best Supporting Actress role, because ladies first. You have Jennifer Jason Leigh for The Hateful Eight, Rooney Mara for Carol, Rachel McAdams for Spotlight, Alicia Vikander for The Danish Girl, and Kate Winslet for Steve Jobs on the ballot. Rooney Mara, to me, I thought had the most solid performance of the crop, but I do not believe there is a lot of love for Carol within the Academy. I'm picking Alicia Vikander for The Danish Girl as Best Supporting Actress, and I think that's the way that it's going to wind up going down. Best Actor in a Supporting Role: Christian Bale for The Big Short, Tom Hardy for The Revenant, Mark Ruffalo for Spotlight, Mark Rylance for Bridge of Spies, and Sylvester Stallone for Creed. I thought Ruffalo was really excellent in Spotlight, but Spotlight does not seem to be getting as much love as I thought it would heading into the Oscar race. I thought Mark Rylance in Bridge of Spies was also fantastic, but there doesn't necessarily seem to be a groundswell of support for anything Bridge of Spies right now. The Big Short is I think is going to go long here at the Oscars, but I don't necessarily know that Bale is one of the guys who's going to take home a trophy for that film. I'm going with Stallone as the sentimental sort of nostalgia pick. I think people love him in this character. Did not win an Oscar playing Rocky years ago. I think this is the chance he gets to win an Oscar playing Rocky, and for that, Sylvester Stallone will capture the best supporting actor role at this year's Oscars. Best Director, let's go there. Best Director, Adam McKay for The Big Short, George Miller for Mad Max Fury Road, Alexandra Inarritu for The Revenant, Lenny Abramson for Room, and Tom McCarthy for Spotlight. There is a lot of love for The Revenant right now. A lot of love for The Revenant. There's also a great deal of love for Adam McKay over at The Big Short. But I feel if you're going to take a filmmaker who managed to do something quite amazing and dazzling with their film, I think you cannot give it to anyone else but George Miller for Mad Max Fury Road. And for that, I think we will witness it! George Miller taking home a Best Director trophy for Mad Max Fury Road this weekend at the Oscars. Let's move into the major acting categories. Best Actress and Best Actor. Best Actress has Cate Blanchett for Carol, Brie Larson for Room, Jennifer Lawrence for Joy, Charlotte Rampling for 45 Years, and Saoirse Ronan for Brooklyn. Cate Blanchett I thought was fantastic in Carol, but once again, not a lot of Carol love across the board here. Jennifer Lawrence is always a pleasure, but I don't think she's as strong in Joy as she has in other films. I think Brie Larson is the slam dunk here. I think if you're going to go to Vegas, as we've talked about on a previous show, with Gregory Elwood on one of our previous Just the Worst movie review podcasts when the Oscar nominations were first announced. He said that Brie Larson was the prohibitive favorite. If you were going to go to Vegas and drop some money on it, Brie Larson would be who you're going to do it on. I agree. Once again, if you got some cash laying around, you want to see if you can make a few quick bucks, put some money on Brie Larson to win Best Actress at the Oscars this particular weekend. Brie Larson for Room, that's who's going to take home the trophy. Best Actor in a Leading Role. Bryan Cranston for Trumbo, Matt Damon for The Martian, Leonardo DiCaprio for The Revenant, Michael Fassbender for Steve Jobs, and Eddie Redmayne for The Danish Girl. This is DiCaprio's trophy to lose. And it would be highway robbery. Someone would have to go in and switch the envelopes, sort of Naked Gun style, for Leonardo DiCaprio to not win an Oscar this week. This is another, for me, sure bet. Take your money and put it on DiCaprio. You're not going to get very good odds, but if you want to at least say you won, DiCaprio winning for The Revenant, this is the one that's going to go down. So, absolutely get ready for Leonardo DiCaprio to finally get the Oscar that people have felt he's been deprived of this many years. So, DiCaprio for Best Oscar. Now, let's move on to the big one, Best Picture. Number of films here nominated this year. I think only a handful of contenders, though. The Big Short, Bridge of Spies, Brooklyn, Mad Max Fury Road, The Martian, The Revenant, Room, and Spotlight. Look, if I had my druthers, it would be Mad Max Fury Road. And with my heart, I'm going to predict Mad Max Fury Road. But I also do not think that that film is going to happen as the Best Picture. There is a lot of love for The Revenant out there. People who are really emphatic about what that film does. However, I think we're going to get more of the understated but quality film that a lot of people really seem to have a great deal of affection for, and that's Adam McKay's The Big Short. It's a difficult subject matter going back to the source material, and the way that they were able to sort of bring it to the big screen and explain everything that happened with the financial crisis and the collapse of the housing market. I think Adam McKay's film will receive a great deal of recognition this weekend. It will be in the Best Picture category, and I look to see Adam McKay win Best Picture for The Big Short. Those are my Oscar predictions for the 88th Annual Academy Awards. So we'll check back next week and see how I did. I know you're going to be watching the show. I look forward to Chris Rock absolutely skewering Hollywood for some of its race issues, and hopefully the rest of the show is entertaining. If we get one of those 3-hour and 45-minute, 4.5-hour bore fests, I'm going to be kind of pissed because they just never seem to learn how to move this thing along. With that said, I'm going to get out of here. This has been the show. Make sure you follow all of our social media accounts. Head over to Twitter. Follow at JTW Podcast. That's the official podcast handle on Twitter for Just the Worst Podcast. The mothership at Tis Infamous. That's the official podcast handle, official Twitter handle for This Is Infamous. So make sure you hit up that one at Tis Infamous as we get the URL and the website restructured and up and running again. That's where you'll find the announcements as far as when that is fully completed. So at Tis Infamous. Me, I'm there at Infamous Kid, 2 Ds at the end. That's where you'll find all of my ramblings and musings at Infamous Kid over on Twitter. Over on Facebook, make sure you follow us and like us and work through all those crazy Facebook algorithms to get all of our content. Facebook.com/JustTheWorstPodcast, Facebook.com/TisInfamous, and Facebook.com/BillyTheKid. Once again, 2 Ds at the end. All the podcasts can be found at SoundCloud.com. That's SoundCloud.com/JustTheWorstPodcast. Also, on your mobile device, you download the SoundCloud app. So on your phone, on your tablet, you get the SoundCloud app. Make sure you're a fan and you subscribed to Just the Worst Podcast, and you will have all of our various shows and the episodes that go with them in the palm of your hands, on the go for you to take with you wherever it is that you are. You can always listen to us. The SoundCloud app, that's the way to do it. Otherwise, if you're on your computer, SoundCloud.com/JustTheWorstPodcast. And all the podcasts can also be found on the This Is Infamous YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe to the This Is Infamous YouTube channel. And while there's no cool visuals there for us, you won't actually see my face talking. You will be able to hear the podcast there on YouTube. All my work you can find at JoeBlow.com. This is Infamous, and right here at Just the Worst Podcast. This has been Just the Worst Podcast, episode number 24. I have been your host, Billy Donnelly. I'll be back next week with more to talk about, including seeing how I did on my Oscar predictions. So have yourself a pleasant, immediate future. I'm out of here for now. Peace. Just the Worst Podcast, episode number 1, has been a presentation of Just the Worst Podcast Media.